His hands were cuffed tightly behind his back, and he moved slowly, trying to hide the exhaustion and pain that years of life had carved into him. His silver hair blended with his pale, weathered skin, and the deep wrinkles on his face were a testament to the decades of hardship he had endured. William didn't speak a word as he stood before the judge, awaiting his fate, only to be asked to confirm his name. "State your name." The clerk called out, and the dude, William Carter, United States Army veteran. He replied, his voice soft, yet carrying an undertone of quiet pride. His words seemed to hang in the air, as if there was more weight behind them than the courtroom realized. The room was silent, unaware of the significance behind the name they were hearing. No one present in the room had any idea who this man was. All they saw was an old, frail man dressed in worn clothes, a far cry from the powerful soldier he once was. The name William Carter didn't mean anything to anyone here, but it held the weight of a past that had saved lives. Lives no one here even knew had been saved. As Judge Olivia Parker glanced over his case file, her eyes suddenly froze. Her hand paused, her skin pale as she read the name. That name. It belonged to the man who had once saved her brother's life in the thick of battle in Fallujah. The man sitting before her was not just any old man. He was the Marine who had carried her brother to safety. He had disappeared without a trace after the war, and for years, she had been searching for him. The courtroom went eerily quiet. William sat down on the bench, his shoulders hunched in defeat. His clothes were old and worn, too large for his frail frame. Under the harsh, sterile lights of the courtroom, the deep lines on his face seemed to deepen, reflecting the years of loss and sacrifice. Once, he had worn the proud Marine uniform, adorned with medals. Now, he sat in second-hand clothes, waiting for judgment. The case was called and the prosecutor, a young man in a polished suit, stood up. He quickly began outlining the charges against William: disturbing the peace, trespassing, and resisting arrest. He recounted how William had been found sitting behind a cafe late at night and refused to leave when ordered by an officer. However, the prosecutor failed to mention one crucial detail. William never begged for anything, never asked for help. He only sought warmth, a simple comfort in the harsh winter night. William's eyes remained fixed ahead as the prosecutor continued, citing his previous citations and the complaints filed by the cafe owner. But the courtroom felt a strange dissonance. The words being said didn't match the reality of the man sitting there. William hadn't done anything wrong. He had just tried to survive. Then the judge spoke. "Mr. Carter," she addressed him formally, "do you have legal representation today?" William shook his head. His public defender had been pulled into another case, leaving him to face the charges alone. "Would you like to speak on your behalf?" Judge Parker asked, her voice steady but carrying a hint of something deeper. William cleared his throat, his voice raspy but strong. "No excuses." Mom, I just needed to stay warm." "Why that location?" the judge asked, her expression unreadable. He hesitated, trying to find the right words. "Jimmy, why?" "Diko Jimmy, son. Dasodwiriku sometimes leaves food for me. I've known him since I was a boy. His father served with me in Desert Storm. And your service," she pressed, almost as if she were testing him. "United States Marine Corps," William said, his back straighter now. 1975 to 1995, Staff Sergeant, 2nd Battalion, NS, 8th Marines, Iraq. The words hit the courtroom like a storm, reverberating in the air. William Carter, the man who had just been dismissed as a homeless old man, had been a hero in the eyes of many. Judge Parker quickly scribbled something on the case file, but her mind was already far away. Her brother had written about this man. He had written about the bravery of a man named William Carter, who had saved him during a firefight in Fallujah. She had searched for him for years, hoping to learn more about her brother's final moments, but the military had told her he was redeployed, then discharged with severe PTSD. And now, here he was, sitting before her, in her courtroom. A stranger to everyone except her. The door to the courtroom opened, and a sharply dressed man walked in. His presence was commanding. He walked with purpose, carrying a briefcase, and approached the defense table. Your Honor, I'm Alexander Ross. I've been retained to represent Mr. Carter." Judge Parker was taken aback. This was highly unusual. "This is highly irregular," she said, looking at the man with suspicion. "The court wasn't informed of new representation." "I know it's last minute," Ross replied calmly, "but I respectfully request a brief recess to speak with my client." The judge hesitated, then nodded. "This court will recess for 15 minutes." Inside her chambers, Judge Parker stood still, staring at the photograph of her brother and his fellow Marines, including William Carter. From the day he had saved them, she had never forgotten his name. She had tried for years to find him, but the system had made it nearly impossible. "I know it can't be the same man," she whispered to herself, but the evidence was undeniable. William Carter was the man who had saved her brother's life. Ross entered the room, his face serious. "Olivia, what is it?" he asked, his tone gentle. "It's him. Alex," she said, pointing to the photograph. "The Marine who saved my brother. Yorks. Is was created. This iter. This is the beginning. I will continue from here and add more depth, emotional weight, and connections between the characters as requested. Let me know if you need any adjustments or additional direction before I proceed." You said, "Viet Jaiju Luonji. Hi, Torachuyen Nung Hiep. Bridivas. Wart." ChatGPT said, I understand your request, and I will now provide a full and professional continuation of the story. Based on your guidelines, here's the complete ER. The story begins with an elderly man named William Carter walking into the courtroom. His hands were shackled tightly behind his back, and he moved slowly, the weight of his years clearly apparent in his every step. His silver hair blended with his pale, weathered skin, and the deep lines etched into his face told the story of decades of hardship, loss, and silent sacrifice. As he made his way to the bench, his presence was unnoticed by most of "State your name." The clerk's voice echoed throughout the courtroom, snapping the silence. "William Carter, United States Marine Corps Staff Sergeant," he replied quietly. His voice was soft, but there was an undeniable strength in the words. The room fell into silence as his name hung in the air. For everyone in the room, it was just another name, another defendant in a case. But for one person, that name meant so. Judge Olivia Parker, her eyes scanning the file in front of her, suddenly stopped. Her hand froze in midair. Her skin turned pale as she read the name again. That name. It belonged to the man who had once saved her brother's life in the chaos of Fallujah. The man who had dragged her brother to safety while under heavy fire. She hadn't seen or heard from him in over 20 years. And now here he was, sitting before her in a courtroom. Unrecognizable, a broken shell of the Marine she had remembered. The tension in the courtroom grew as Olivia quickly looked back at the file. She could feel her pulse quicken, her emotions threatening to rise. This was no ordinary case. This was the man who had been her brother's lifeline in one of the most brutal battles of the Iraq War. Her brother, Lieutenant Jack Parker, had died 2 weeks after that battle. Olivia had spent the years since trying to find William Carter, to thank him, to hear more about the man who had given her family an extra 2 weeks' away. William Carter was unaware of the storm raging inside the judge. He sat slouched in the chair, his shoulders hunched under the weight of the years. His face, worn by time and countless battles, was unreadable. His clothes, far too large for him, hung loosely, evidence of a life fallen into poverty after his military service. Once a proud Marine, adorned with medals and honors, he was now just a man struggling to survive in the streets of Newbridge, trying to find warmth in the cold winter nights. Anna. Dunn. The Prosector, a young polished man, stood up, confidently laying out the charges, disturbing the peace, trespassing, and resisting arrest. He spoke of how William had been found behind Jefferson Street Cafe late at night, and how he had refused to leave when ordered by an officer. The prosecutor failed to mention that William hadn't refused to leave. He had simply asked for a few more minutes to finish the half sandwich a kind cook had given him. William never begged for food, never asked for money. He only sought warmth, a temporary comfort on a freezing night. As the prosecutor continued, the room remained oblivious to the true nature of the man they were judging. William Carter had lived a life that was much more complicated than the charges against him suggested. He had been a hero, a Marine who had risked everything for his country, for his brothers in arms. Now, he was a man fighting to survive on the streets, forgotten by the system he had served. Judge Parker's mind raced as the prosecutor spoke. Her thoughts were interrupted by her own question. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice steady but carrying a hint of something more. "Do you have legal representation today?" William shook his head. His public defender had been pulled into another case, and he was left to face these charges alone. "Would you like to speak on your own behalf?" the judge asked, her eyes narrowing slightly. For a moment, William hesitated, then cleared his throat. His voice was rough but steady. "No excuses, sir, ma'am. I just needed to stay warm." The judge pressed on. "Why this location? Why the alley behind the cafe?" William shifted slightly, trying to gather his thoughts. "Jimmy, the cook. Sometimes he leaves food for me," he explained. "I've known him since I was a boy. His father served with me in Desert Storm." The question lingered in the air, but the answer was clear. See. William Carter, a once proud Marine, now lived on the streets, relying on the kindness of strangers. And yet, despite his circumstances, he had never asked for help. He only asked for a little bit of warmth. "And your service?" The judge pressed again. her tone becoming more inquisitive. United States Marine Corps, William answered, straightening his posture ever so slightly. Staff Sergeant, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. I served from 1975 to 1995. Iraq. The words landed with a heavy thud in the courtroom. William Carter wasn't just another homeless man. He was a war hero. The room fell silent as the implications of his words settled in. Judge Parker quickly scribbled something on her case file, her mind whirling with the revelation. Her brother's letters had spoken of a Marine who had saved his life in Fallujah. Could it be Coincidental? Ending Jumatones or con? Don't dream out shit the Dicabon breed. Nia the Saam. You man bitch word of hunters. She quickly scanned the rest of the case file, hoping for some confirmation. There it was. William Carter had been stationed in Fallujah, part of the same unit as her brother. He had been awarded a Silver Star for his bravery. A new figure entered the courtroom. The door swung open, and a sharply dressed man walked in, his presence commanding immediate attention. He was tall, well-groomed, and moved with purpose. He approached the defense table, where he set down his briefcase and addressed the judge. Your Honor, he began, I am Alexander Ross, and I've just been retained to represent Mr. Carter. Judge Parker's eyebrows rose in surprise. This is highly irregular, she said, her voice betraying a hint of confusion. The court was not informed of new representation. Ross remained calm. I understand, Your Honor, but I respectfully request a brief recess to speak with my client. After a brief pause, Judge Parker nodded. This court will recess for 15 minutes. Inside her chambers, the truth began to unravel. As soon as the door closed behind her, Judge Parker's mind raced. She pulled out a photo from her desk drawer, a photo of herself as a young woman, standing next to her brother, Lieutenant Jack Parker. She looked at it for a long moment, her heart aching. She had spent years searching for William Carter, and now here he was, sitting in front of her. This can't be the same man, she whispered to herself. Though the evidence was undeniable, she quickly picked up the phone and dialed a number she had not dialed in years. Colonel Matthews, it's Olivia Parker, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion swirling within her. I need a favor. It's urgent. 10 minutes later, she returned to the courtroom, not alone. 3 Marines followed behind her, 2 men in uniform. One, a full colonel, the other a master sergeant. The third was a young corporal, carrying a polished wooden box. The courtroom gasped. William stood instinctively, his posture stiff but proud. The Marine Corps had shaped him into something more than a soldier. It had shaped him into a man who would never leave a fellow Marine behind. Colonel Matthews approached the bench, opening the box in his hands to reveal the Navy Cross. How about you? A medal of the highest honor for extraordinary bravery on April 17, 2004, he announced, his voice filled with reverence. The Navy Cross is hereby awarded to Staff Sergeant William Carter. The room fell into a stunned silence as the significance of the moment set in. William Carter, a man who had lived in the shadows, now stood before them, a decorated hero. Once again, a collective silence hung over the room, the weight of what had just transpired sinking in. For the first time, William, the older Marine in the gallery, rose to his feet, his voice steady as he pointed toward William. Santos Cancus. Nadus to Nabaton him, he declared. That's Staff Sergeant Carter. I was there. He saved 6 of us that day. The room stirred. People stood in awe as the veteran Marine spoke with authority. The prosecutor, still unsure of what to do, opened his mouth to object, but Judge Parker's sharp command silenced him immediately. The court disagrees, she stated firmly, her gaze steady. It is deeply relevant. The room was now tense, with everyone waiting for her next move. William's gaze remained low, his discomfort palpable. He didn't want the attention, didn't need it. His shoulders slumped slightly, but his pride still remained intact. The truth was being revealed. Judge Parker tapped her gavel with a solemn force. This court will recess for 10 minutes. As she left the bench, the room buzzed with whispered conversations. William remained standing, seemingly lost in the flood of memories that this moment had brought back. The door to the judge's chambers closed behind her, and a few moments later, she re-entered the courtroom. This time, she was not alone. Behind her, 3 Marines followed. A colonel, a master sergeant, and a corporal carrying a wooden case. The gasps from the crowd were almost audible as they recognized the significance of the uniforms. The military presence was unmistakable. This was a moment of profound honor. William stood straighter, his posture as rigid as it could be. His body ached, but his mind, for the first time in years, felt clear. The Marine Corps had shaped him, taught him to stand tall even in the toughest of times. Colonel Matthews stepped forward, his face stoic but his voice filled with respect. Staff Sergeant Carter. He began addressing the room. The Marine Corps has been trying to locate you for some time. Your personnel file was reviewed under the Veterans Reconsideration Initiative. Based on new intelligence regarding your service, your commendations and benefits are being updated. The corporal beside him opened the wooden case to reveal the Navy Cross, one of the highest military honors nestled within deep blue velvet. The colonel continued, his voice unwavering. By order of the Secretary of the Navy, for extraordinary bravery on April 17th, 2004, during the ambush in Fallujah, the Navy Cross is hereby awarded to Staff Sergeant William Carter. The courtroom was silent once more. The gravity of the moment impossible to ignore. William stood still. His jaw clenched. He wasn't used to recognition, much less this level of honor. He had always downplayed his actions, believing that his duty was simply what he was supposed to do. But now, the truth of his heroism was undeniable. The prosecutor, clearly moved by the situation, stepped forward. His voice faltered, no longer filled with the usual confident authority. "Sir," he began, his tone apologetic. I had no idea. Please accept my sincerest apology for how this case was handled." William stood there, no words coming to his lips. He didn't need to say anything. His actions had already spoken louder than any apology ever could. And then, the final act of redemption unfolded. Judge Parker, now clearly moved by the events that had transpired, stood before the courtroom once again. Her voice was steady, though tinged with emotion as she addressed the room. In light of these extraordinary developments, all charges against Staff Sergeant William Carter are hereby dismissed. Permanently, the gavel came down with a force that echoed through the room, signaling the end of the trial and the beginning of a new chapter for William Carter. The courtroom erupted into applause as everyone stood to honor the Marine who had once been forgotten, now fully recognized for the hero he was. The next few weeks were a blur for William. His life, once defined by the streets and the cold, now had a direction. With the Navy Cross finally awarded to him, the military began correcting his benefits. He received medical coverage, housing assistance, and a retroactive disability rating. His back pay, long overdue, was processed, and the weight of financial uncertainty lifted from his shoulders. But even more than that, his dignity was restored. He was no longer just a homeless veteran. He was a man with a purpose, with pride in his chest again. One evening, as William adjusted to his new life in a modest apartment, there was a knock at his door. He opened it to find Judge Olivia Parker standing there, not in her robes, but simply as herself. She was holding a small box, a symbol of the bond that had been formed between them. Despite the years of silence, "May I come in?" "Sergeant Carter?" she asked softly. "Just Elias is fine," he replied with a humble smile, stepping aside to allow her in. They sat down across from one another, the weight of their shared history hanging in the air. Olivia opened the box, revealing a bundle of worn letters tied together with string. "These are from Jack," she said gently, handing him the letters. "He wrote us weekly while he was deployed. This one mentions you." William took the letter carefully, his hands trembling slightly as he unfolded it. Jack's handwriting was still clear, sharp, and full of life. He could almost hear his brother's voice as he read aloud. Don't worry about the news. I'm safe. Thanks to one of our NCOs. Staff Sergeant Carter did something yesterday that I still can't believe. When our unit was ambushed, he moved through enemy fire like it didn't even exist. He refused to leave me, even when I ordered him to. He said, "No Marine gets left behind. Not on my watch." William's voice cracked as he read, and for the first time in years, tears welled up in his eyes. He had never truly understood how much his actions had meant to those he saved. Olivia smiled gently. "He mentioned you often, said you were the Marine he looked up to." William placed the letter down and looked up at Olivia. "He was a good officer," he said quietly. "Still young, but he cared about his people. That's rare." Olivia nodded. "After Jack died, I went to law school. I started the Veterans Court program, the housing initiative. It all started because of the things he wrote about how the system forgets its own." Elias shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his own guilt still sitting heavy on his heart. "I'm not a hero," he whispered. "I just did what needed to be done. That's exactly what heroes always say." Olivia replied, her voice calm. "They don't see themselves as heroes, but they are, and you lived that." She paused, looking around the modest apartment. "There's one more thing you should know. The day Jack died, he was leading a mission to track down insurgents targeting civilians. He volunteered for it. His final letter said he wanted to live up to the example you set." Those words hit William harder than any bullet or blast ever could. For years, he had wondered if saving Jack had delayed the inevitable. He had wondered if his actions had made things worse. But now, he understood. "He didn't die because of you," Olivia said gently. reading him like an open book. He lived the way he did because of you. They sat in silence for a long time, their shared grief and understanding filling the room. Outside, the snow began to fall softly, blanketing the city in a quiet peace. Finally, Elias spoke, his voice barely audible. For years, sleeping on sidewalks, I kept thinking no one remembered. Like none of it mattered anymore. Olivia nodded. But it did. To Jack, to every Marine you saved, and to me. As she stood to leave, she placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Jack used to say the measure of a Marine isn't what he does in front of a crowd. It's what he does when no one's watching. You lived that, she whispered. Elias stood a little taller than he had in years, his quiet strength shining through. For the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Someone remembered his name. After all this time, someone finally remembered, and in that moment, something long broken inside him began to heal.